Hello and welcome back to the Modern Leader Way. Today I am joined by the lovely Anna Smith. Welcome, Anna.
You.
So pleased to have you here. This is a conversation that I've wanted to have for a while. I actually came across Anna and her team at ALS Recruitment probably around Christmas time, and I was just really struck by, I don't know, there was just something about you and your team and the way you were posting on LinkedIn and talking about these jobs that were out there and encouraging people, or just I think humanizing the job description, I think is what I saw. And I just really liked it. There was a bit of humor in there. They were very light-hearted. You were very approachable. And I just thought, you know what? I want to have these women on my podcast. So I reached out and you were like, yeah, why not? Not the usual kind of request, but here we are. So thank you for saying yes. And why don't you give us a bit of a brief introduction to who you are, and we'll go from there.
So thank you. I mean, we try to be human. I am Anna Smith. I have ALS Recruitment. I started it up coming up for 8 years ago now. We focus on the insurance market. So we've got Terry who focuses on the London market, Kat and I focus on the regional market, and Molly helps support us. She's also started to sort of move into more of a resourcing role as well. So we're out there trying to do our best. Um, I set up the business because as like many industries, 8 years ago, there was no flexibility offered when you went off and had a baby. Recruitment being the industry that it was, you had to sort of, be in really for 7:30 in order to catch people before they started work. And then you needed to stay until 7 o'clock really to speak to people after work. So that's not ideal when you've got a young family. So I have always wanted to own my own business, but at 25, I felt like I was too young. Um, Other people told me that I was probably too young and it was a bit risky, and that actually did the complete opposite and made me want to do it and prove everybody wrong. So that's what I did.
And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. And I've since gone on to have three other children. So I have four daughters, a big responsibility to try and lead from the front, always. So yeah.
You, I love that. And I also love that. I get a bit of that rebellious kind of streak in me in terms of like when people tell you you can't do something, it's like, well, watch me.
Absolutely. And actually, I started off in hairdressing. I was a hairdresser for
Oh, okay.
yeah. And do you know what? It was the best grounding I could have ever wanted from like a service-based industry, because you really do have to provide a good service.
Yeah.
And it also teaches you things like retention. So what a lot of people don't think about is sometimes transferable skills from sort of roles like that, because actually there's got to be a reason people come back to you every 6 to 8 weeks to have their hair
Yeah,
cut.
absolutely. Yeah.
And if you're not delivering a good service, they're not going to want to come back to you. So
Mm.
I've kind of taken that on into recruitment really. But I remember when I left and said that this is what I was going to go and do, and one of the directors of the company that I was working for turned around and said, "Oh, Anna, recruitment, can't see it." And I used that. I was like, I never forget that. But that was like a driving force to make sure that it worked.
Brilliant.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm thankful.
Yeah. Absolutely, that is so cool. I actually had a conversation when I took redundancy after 20 years in insurance, and I sat down with one of the senior leaders that had always championed me, and he had created this role for me. Like it was a temporary role just to get me through 12 months, and then I could find something a little bit more settled. And I went and said thank you, but I'm going to take the redundancy. And he said, oh, most people spend the money after 12 months, they're crawling back for a job. And I went, won't be me. And I was like determined that that is not going to be me ever. So here we are, 7.5 years later. So I think we found our driving force in the
Yeah,
in.
absolutely. People telling us that we can't do something.
I love it. So you started a business at 25, and so you hadn't come from recruitment either.
So I was in recruitment for 3 years
Right.
prior to starting up my own business.
Okay.
But again, you could say that that's really like that's not a lot of experience.
Yeah, I love that. And so in 8 years, what have you, or even longer than that, 10 years or so, what have you seen change in this kind of like recruitment landscape? Are there things that have like are now outdated that you saw when you first kind of got into it? Is it that kind of evolving market?
I think so. I think one of the most prominent things is that employers don't have the control, really, when it comes to hiring. It's all about what the candidate wants. And if you can't meet that, then they'll move on to the next company. So it's very, and we've seen that a lot over the past 12 months, I would say. So things like compromising on salary. So you would put forward what you're looking for. If you don't get that, there's no compromise. You know,
Right.
kind of like, this is what I'm looking for. I've really thought this through. This is what this job means to me. And if the employer can't meet that,
Mhm.
then it's, you know, it's kind of, it is what it is. There doesn't seem to be, I don't want to say compromise, because people sort of really do understand their worth, and they, a lot of the time it is about education as well. Like, when we're recruiting, we will speak to candidates about salaries and give them a realistic approach. Um, but there's no like give and take so much anymore. And that's quite a prominent thing that we have seen, especially over the last 12 months. So if you are looking to hire, for example, um, and you're putting out a salary range, then it, candidates will want the top end, and that's kind of it, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it fair to say it's like um a job seekers market?
Absolutely. And, I think it's because of things like, and I know I don't want to keep, no one wants to keep talking about COVID, but it was such an instrumental thing that changed the way a lot of things work. And there used to be sort of peaks and troughs, and kind of, it used to swing and roundabouts that, it was an employer's market, and then a candidate market, then an employer's market, then a candidate market. But it's been very much from a candidate perspective, and they've had the ball in their court for longer.
Right.
Yeah.
And presumably, I mean, yeah, COVID, everyone sort of shut down and worked from home, right? And I think that forced some of these kind of really old school kind of companies that were very much about presenteeism to, force their hand to trust their employees to like make the best of it. So how much I'm kind of hearing grumblings from a lot of people that I work with that there's now more lip service played to that kind of hybrid working, remote kind of thing, and they're actually trying to bring back in people to the office because they're paying for this
Yeah.
expensive space, right? Potentially in London or other cities, so they do want to make the most of their offices. So, how much are you seeing like a genuine acceptance of this hybrid remote kind of option to get the right candidates in, and how much of it is lip service, do you think?
I think it's an interesting question because, I've worked remotely personally for the last 7, 8 years, and it's served a purpose because my kids were small, and I've still got a 1 year old, so I've kind of gone back. But, you know, I do find that at a certain point, you do kind of want you back, and actually going to an office does help with that. But I think in terms of employers and, what they're saying versus what they're doing, it goes back to the fact that it's a candidate market. So they have to accommodate. Yes, I would say a lot of companies they do want that office presence, but I think there are sort of more genuine reasons behind that, like, company culture and kind of creating that team environment. It's really, really difficult to do remotely. And it's quite difficult to sort of, train people remotely. It takes longer, so I think that there is a place for it. Um, there are companies that are doing it because, that's just what they want to do, and they're not really so fussed about what other people have to say about it. Um, but yeah, I think the more genuine businesses, are really flexible. I think sometimes the other ones who want to force people back into the office, it's more of a control element,
Mhm.
perhaps.
Yeah. And I guess at the sort of more senior level that you're kind of looking at in terms of the roles that you're recruiting for, there is like a need for that more senior presence to encourage people to come in and like give a reason to be there and to be able to lead like from being there rather than always being absent, I guess. So there is a fine balance, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's such a complex topic, I would say. Hybrid versus remote versus fully office based. I think they all have a place. It just depends on what type of role it is, what type of business it is. Um, I don't, I would never agree with someone sort of being in the office full time. That's kind of a little bit unnecessary. I don't think people can get away with that now. Um, and I don't think there are a lot of businesses out there who are doing that anyway. I think the mindset has changed. If you can be flexible, they generally are. So,
How much how much do you get to influence what the job spec looks like when a company comes to you and says, help us find the right candidate?
I mean, we prefer working relationships where we can provide that, I'm going to say, consultative advice and guidance, because actually, that is where we excel, and that's where pieces of recruitment work best and they're more efficient. If we can have not an input because it's somebody else's business, but
Yeah.
we're e- experts within our area. The hiring managers or decision makers that come to us are experts in their area, and it's kind of like marrying the two up. Um, so I think, regardless of what we say, some companies will take it on board and others will just do their own thing anyway, as we all do sometimes. Um, but the best working relationships and the most successful pieces of recruitment come from, a mutual understanding and a mutual respect on, we know our market, and yeah, yours, and
Mhm.
sometimes we are able to influence a decision. But a lot of people are flexible for the right people as well. If you get an outstanding candidate, or you're going for a job, but you just need that bit of flexibility, again, we can kind of help to influence that decision a little bit.
Mm.
I would never force anyone to to
Sure.
take a job, or force to hire somebody.
Yeah.
Not how. I don't think that's not a successful piece of recruitment. We're dealing with people at the end of the day, and you have your own minds, and you want your own things, and trying to force someone into a job or force someone into hiring someone never ends well. So yeah.
What would you love potential candidates or people thinking maybe they're stagnating in their role, they're thinking like they've hit a ceiling, they're potentially looking for a job, but they've got it easy, right? A lot, I think this is the problem. It is a problem, but we come up against this kind of comfort level
Yeah.
almost. Like it's comfortable where I am. It feels like too hard to look out there. Um, you still hear a lot of people that are applying for roles, they don't even hear anything. So it feels like a big chore. Why would someone come to you,
Oh, that's a
your
good.
company? What would you love them to know about recruiting these days? Because I don't think it was ever really on my radar back in the, like I'm talking like 10 years ago when I might have been looking for a role. Yeah, what's the benefits of them coming to you? And what are some of maybe the myths you want to bust about recruiting agencies?
I mean, I think we're in the same category as insurance brokers and estate agents, to be honest. So, but at the end of the day, I think, we everyone will say that they really care, but we do really care about what we do. And we try our best as much as we can. We're human at the end of the day, and like you rightly said in the beginning, we do try and take a human approach. We do try and, we're relatable, we're personable, we are just out here trying to do a good job. Um, and I feel like we do a pretty good job, to be honest. We sort of regularly send out sort of feedback forms and things like that, and the feedback that we get is always really positive, and we welcome, constructive feedback as well, because we want to do better. Um, but I think ultimately everybody, I would say, is classed as a candidate. So you get, lots of people saying on LinkedIn and other, forums and things like that, that, there's a candidate shortage. And I'm not willing to accept that, if I'm being honest. I just think either the jobs on offer aren't good enough, or they're not flexible enough, or, they're just not ticking all the boxes. But I think, you know, there is a job out there for everybody. And I think if you're sat there in a position where you're like, oh, I'm quite comfortable, there is always a job that's better than the one that you're in. You just haven't found it yet.
Yeah. So,
So,
so rather than trawling through LinkedIn, perhaps, and the job ads on there, maybe it's just pick up the phone and have a chat.
and do you know what? I was just going to come to that. I think what we've got in the habit of now is just applying for a job.
Mm,
So click apply, easy apply, AI, applying for jobs.
mm,
And actually, you do get lost in 200 other applications. And it is, we try our best to go back to everyone. And actually, that's the initially why I brought Kat on in the first place, because I just was struggling to keep up with everybody, and it was my business, and I want the perception of my business to be as good as it can be. And seeing people through COVID crying on the phone and, so absolutely destroyed that they haven't heard back from the 130 applications that they've made. I just made it. I mean, I'd always been someone who will just pick up the phone and tell someone if they haven't got the job, I'll just let them know. Um, but I was struggling to keep up with the sheer volume of people that were applying for jobs.
mm.
So I brought Kat on to help me with that, because that was something that was really important to me. Um, and, if you're getting 200, 250 applications for a job, that's a lot of people to go back to. And you do get like the AI sort of like quick message sort of things. And even then, that doesn't make me feel very comfortable, because I just feel like if someone's applying to a job with you, you should at least just give them something. If they're not right for the job, at least a bit of advice, or, what's in it for them, even though they're applying for the job and they're not right, what can they take away from it?
Yeah.
Um, so we do try and always do that. Um, so yeah.
So you've got Kat there literally doing this as a full-time job in terms of like she is
I
the
mean, she's resourcing now as well, so she's
right.
kind of like. But initially, when I first brought her on, it was just to kind of the work volume and the sheer amount of people that were applying for jobs at the time was just too much to keep up with, and I didn't sit right with me that some people weren't getting a response,
Yeah,
because I was only one person at that point.
yeah,
So
amazing. So so it feels like it is, and we'll make sure there's all links to you and the team on LinkedIn. I guess LinkedIn is the best place, isn't it?
yeah, I would say
Like,
so. I mean, we're currently in the process of having a new website, so yeah, I'd rather LinkedIn at the minute.
yeah, so we'll make sure that's there, and I think encourage everyone just to get in touch or just to follow you. That's what I did. Follow you, get a flavour for the sort of roles that you're putting out there, and then just pick up the phone. I think you come to London a bit, do you?
Yeah,
To
we do. So I try to come up to the city sort of twice a month. I meet with Terry. Terry, she's Essex based, so she can get into the city really easily. So
nice,
yeah.
nice. What about redundancies? Do you see a lot of people come to you because they've been made redundant? Because that just seems like it's happening more and more. I'm guessing with like companies merging. We're certainly seeing it in the life insurance industry, which is kind of where I come from. But
Yeah.
um, what like what's your best advice to someone that's sort of in that redundancy situation?
I think there's sort of the redundancy situation, and then there's that sort of consultation period, right? So it's kind of like you're waiting to find out. I think the one thing that you have to be mindful of is that if you wait, there is a chance that you could be found another role within the business that you're probably going to have to interview two, 3 times, maybe four. Um, but then if that's not the case and you are being made redundant, you're also going to be made redundant with a lot of other people at the same time. So you are probably better off exploring the market to see if there is something that you are interested in that moment in time, because if it so happens that you sort of do get that redundancy, then you're going to be sort of in amongst it with, 10 other people potentially, depending on how big the business is and how many redundancies that they make. So, whilst a lot of the time, if you've been somewhere, like you said, 20 years, you've got a lot of loyalties, but when it comes down to, being made redundant, it kind of takes that, you know, element away, I think.
Yeah. I mean, certainly if someone can, so someone's got the confirmation that they're being made redundant, they've been there 10, 20 years, they're walking away with a
Yeah.
decent package, decent enough that's going to like give them a buffer to
Yeah.
take some time off and take some time out for a year or so. I am a big advocate for doing that because I feel like when you've been employed your entire life, like you've gone through
Yeah.
school, then you're employed, or maybe you went to university, now you're employed. Like you don't know anything else. And it's actually when you give yourself that space and time out, like I host time out retreats for this exact reason,
Oh, nice.
to just allow people to take a step away
Oh,
from that.
you offer that just for mums who just need a bit of time
Like,
out?
mums are very welcome.
Oh,
They're probably
it
needed as
sounds
well.
great.
Got one in Spain coming up in September.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, yeah. But I am like a big advocate for like really like taking that space and time out to like just check in, like, do I actually want to go back into this industry in a similar role? Because I think we just get on this path and we don't see the little twists and turns that it can necessarily take until we take a step back. So I think actually redundancy is a great opportunity to step back. And also then once you've had some space, you can almost like, if you know, yeah, I want to get back into what I know the best because it's what I do the best, what I enjoy, then you're so much more grounded in that and so much more confident and sure of what it is that you're bringing to your next role that I think it's like incredibly powerful to take that step away. But I think there's a lot of people that get into a bit more panic and think I have to have that known next step. And this kind of open space is a little bit more scary. So
Yeah, I think so. I think probably what's really useful for people to know, especially if you are in a situation where you are looking for a job, is that a lot of companies, it gets a lot busier around sort of the end of March, beginning of April time, all the way through, usually until about June, July time. So,
the
for
bonuses.
example, if you are being made redundant in November, which is a really rubbish time of year to be made
Yeah.
redundant, and you see it quite a lot actually. A lot of companies will make people redundant in November, December, which I think is incredibly unfair. Um, you if you've been given, if you worked somewhere for 20 years, let's just talk about it from that side. You know that you can, I want to say safely say that actually you can take a bit of time off
Mhm.
and to reflect and see what it is that you want to do, knowing that the job market massively picks up around March, April time.
Yeah.
So I think that's really useful for people to know. It does get a bit busy around September to October. I would say sometimes it goes into the beginning of November, ready for people to start either before Christmas or after Christmas.
Right. Yeah.
And then sort of January, towards the end of January, February time does tend to go quite quiet. And what we tend to find is a lot of people get quite stressed and worried if they've been out of work since November and they're still not finding anything. And that's quite normal for it not to
Right.
be massively job rich. Um, but then again, you've got the other side where people are made redundant unexpectedly. They don't have, a lot of savings, or they don't
Yeah.
get a payout, or, but I think it would be a good education piece for businesses if they're looking to make redundancies. Maybe, I don't know how it works, but, trying to make it so that it's a bit easier for people to go off and get a new job,
Yeah.
potentially, depending on the time of year. So,
Yeah. No, that's really interesting actually. And I guess you get a lot of people almost like wanting to line up jobs for when they've got their last bonus, right? And then they can
yeah.
take the
Oh,
bonus
yeah. I
around
mean,
March, April
that's
time.
that's definitely a massive factor as to why, that time of year becomes quite, job rich, because you get people who collect their bonus and then leave, or, don't get a pay rise, or they don't get a promotion, or, and also a lot of companies were like, right, it's the end of the tax year. We're now gonna, use start sort of, have the budgets ready to kind of hire across that period of time. So yeah, there's loads of different reasons, but if you are being made redundant in August, September, and you've got a good maybe six months worth of, redundancy money, you can sort of safely say that actually, you're going to be okay. By the time it gets to March, it does get busier. That's not to say that jobs don't come up, because they do. Um, but towards the end of the year, it's normally the last bit of the budget, perhaps. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just sitting there as you're talking, thinking, well, if I was being made redundant now, I would probably, and I could take some time off, say I could take the rest of the year off. It's probably like, is it in my interest to like reach out to you guys now and just put myself on your radar so that you're actually thinking about me as the year progresses in terms of like the particular roles? Is that how it works still in recruitment? Can you keep
yeah,
like
you
your eye on all these
can.
individuals?
Like I worked with somebody a few years ago who was due to be made redundant, and actually um she was on maternity leave as well, and there was sort of floatings of redundancy at that point. And I mean, she wasn't due back to work until like the September, but I spoke to her in like the March, I think it was. Um, and I sort of kept in communication with her, and I said, listen, because obviously when you hear that, if you're on maternity leave or you're kind of in that situation, where you're due to go back to work, you're panicking at that point, because you're like, what am I going to do? And I sort of said to her, I said, listen, I said, don't panic about it right now. I said, because you've still got sort of 3, 4 months left. um, let's have a catch up sort of in the summer. And we did, and I managed to secure her something else to start in the November. We started working together properly in the September. So, it can work, because sometimes we don't always have something for you right this second. But that's not to say that in 3, 4 months' time, something might not come up that is the perfect opportunity that you would definitely want to hear about.
Yeah. Right.
Um, I also have another example. So, I had a phone call off of someone who was sort of at risk of redundancy. And she'd not even had her baby yet. So I know. So she was thinking about January, February next year. Um, and again, it's that panic that sets in for people.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It's a
So
difficult one, and there are options and there are people that have got your back. So it's
yeah, absolutely.
find the people that are gonna be looking out for you and kind of
Yeah.
build those relationships now. And also like there's gonna be so many people in the person's network, right? That is gonna also be people that they get to reach out to and just tell them their situations. They've got them in the back of their mind as well. I think when you are faced with something like redundancy, which I think for some people, for me, I thought it'd be the worst case scenario. I thought it would be the worst thing that could happen for me. It actually turned out to be like a blessing. And I actually saw it as an opportunity as soon as it happened, which surprised me. But it's incredible how many people come out of the woodwork and sort of say, let me know if you need anything. And
Yeah.
I think it is really just you're not alone as isolating as it can feel, you're really not alone. So I love hearing that. Like I think, yeah, just get the process started, right? Even if you're
Yeah.
going to take that time off, which I love.
Conversation is never wasted at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Love that. What I know we're talking about insurance in particular because that's your industry, but this I think a lot of this applies to whatever industry people are in, right? It feels like this is pretty general in terms of like the trends that we're going to see across recruitment. So I just wanted to make that point in case someone's listening that's not actually in insurance, because I know not all my listeners are. Um, what about, so we talked about redundancy. I feel like when I started, so we're talking like nearly 30 years ago, it was kind of like seen as a bit of a badge of honor that you'd worked somewhere for 20, 30 years and you didn't like you've given your loyalty to this one company, and as a result you kind of like worked your way up and around the organization and you've been looked after. And it was kind of almost frowned upon when people kind of jumped ship and went somewhere else. It's almost like they were chasing the money, they were just going there to get the big pay rise.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not always sure how it served people to hop jobs. It was almost like, again, seen as, oh, they're a bit flighty and they can't stay in one company for long. Has that changed? Like, what's the view on people wanting to move across the industry and perhaps across lines of business or I know we talked about insurance and reinsurance even like that kind of hopping around the industry. Like what's your view on that and how that's seen?
So I think years ago it was seen as a bit of a red flag if someone were to sort of job hop. But we're talking, 6 months here, 1 year there, 6 months. If you are sort of in a company for a couple of years and you decide to move on, then that's okay. I think COVID, again, going back to it, but it did really shape the way people view things now. It's kind of there's not really as many questions asked, anymore about that. It's just an understanding of, okay, there was a better opportunity that was on the table for you and you decided to go for it. Again, it kind of also goes back to the fact that it's, when you are a candidate and you're applying for jobs, the ball is in your court. And it's the same if you're an employee. If you're not being looked after and you're not being listened to, you've got no loyalties to them anymore because you really feel it. So you will move on and you will find something better than where you're at the moment. And there is an understanding for that when you're job searching. So I think somebody moving around is not seen so much as a red flag anymore.
That's good. That's good to, I think, to hear and just to put it out there. Um, what about where's my thought process going there? Um, no, it's gone. I had another thought and something similar, but anyway, I'm sure it'll come back to me. What about so let's think about so you mentioned AI earlier, and this is
Yeah,
a fascinating thing. So obviously we're not going to get away from AI. It's only going to like be more and more prevalent in our lives.
yeah.
And I'm guessing there are ways in which employ in like recruiting companies are using it, recruitment companies can use it, but also like candidates can use it. What are you seeing like the ways across the board that AI is kind of becoming a useful tool that's going to enhance the whole process and experience of recruitment?
I mean, for me, personally, as a business owner and a recruitment consultant in the insurance market, um, I didn't like it to begin with. I was like, oh no, because I'm a service-based industry, it's personal,
Human, human
it's
to
human,
human.
you know? So I was like, oh no, 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 no. But actually, we can use it in our industry to enhance experience for candidates and clients that we work with. So, things we're currently looking at a new CRM system actually that has some really cool AI tools integrated in it. So, you know, we would normally send out, for example, like a bit of a bio on the candidates that we're representing when we send over CVs. And now this piece of software will kind of pull out things from people's CV and kind of create a bio.
No.
We haven't used this system yet, so, but this is what we've been shown, and it's pretty cool because that
Yeah,
is time consuming sometimes, and then you can kind of personalize it on top of that.
right.
Uh, But it's kind of it helps to add to the experience of other people so that we've got more time to give to you, which I think is a really important thing to mention, to spend time talking to you about what it is that you really want from a job and an employer and vice versa. So that's kind of how we're using it in our business, or looking to use it in our business so that we can kind of give more time to the things that we enjoy and the things that, we're kind of here to help with. Um, and in the industry, I mean, if you're applying for jobs, I mean, everybody will know what it's like to make sure that you've got certain words, because if it goes through an AI system that's only going to pick it up, and send it to the hiring manager if you've got a certain word on your CV, I mean, that's also a bit of a hindrance, to be honest.
What's some of the words then?
Well, just, it will be things like leadership and, it will be certain product lines, for example. So if you're motor or marine or, whatever it might be, if that's not picked up and not on your CV, then you won't be sort of sent to the hiring manager, for example. So that's a massive annoyance for people. And we get a lot of candidates that will say to us, oh, I'm having my CV looked at because I need to make sure it's compatible to go through a system, you know.
Mhm. And presumably candidates can use AI to better or enhance their CV.
Oh, of course, people do. I mean, I think kids are using it in schools to write essays and things like that. And I mean, you could see it as, cheating, or you could see it as using initiative. I mean,
It's out there, isn't it? It's like, how are you going to police it? It's
I
getting
mean,
quite.
CVs for me, I've kind of like I went on a bit of a mission a few years ago to try and educate the fact that CVs really, like, they're so outdated. Why are we still using them? And also, what I don't understand is hiring companies are asking people to fill in forms, essentially a CV, and then attach a CV. So, there needs to be like a bit of an education piece around, time to hire and how important that is, to keep everybody's engagement. If you're asking someone to fill in a form and send a CV that they'll probably need to update, that's time.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean,
And in this day of like easy apply and all that kind of thing, what is going to make your application stand out?
phone call, always.
Yeah,
Yeah, a phone call. People don't do that so much anymore, and the candidates that do pick up the phone are memorable because you remember them picking up the phone.
nice.
And also, you have to really think about it from a type of job that you're applying for. If you're applying for a job where you're going to need to use the phone and communication is really important, as it says on the job description,
Mhm.
being able to demonstrate that you can communicate via telephone, which is probably the first port of call anyway, um, is really important. And then you don't get lost in a sea of 250 CVs.
Yes.
So,
And it keeps that humanness, right, which is so much more important now with AI taking
and
over.
And do you know what, as well? Like, there is no harm in expressing if you are interested in a role. People don't do that so much anymore. So, again, that will really help you stand out when you're looking for a job. If there is a job that you really, really want and you've gone for the interview, say, I'm really interested in this job,
Mm.
really like the company. Everyone tries to keep their cards close to their chest all the time, and actually being honest and just saying, if you don't ask, you don't get, right? So,
Love that. What other tips have you got for in interviews then? So someone's actually there, perhaps they're in the second round, like what do you hear? What feedback do you get from companies that like meant that it was a no-brainer for them to hire someone because of the interview?
I think it's an interesting question because some people can perform really well in an interview and then it's not the case when they start. So I think just try and be yourself throughout the whole process because you've got nothing to hide at that point. Always be um, sort of, I would say, constructive. So if you're asked a question, and competency questions are another bugbear of mine, to be honest. But if you are answering competency questions, things like the STAR method are really good to look at because it helps kind of formulate your response. And I always think of it like, I don't know if anyone remembers, but at school I was taught how to write like an essay. So you start with an introduction, then it kind of goes down from that point, and you sort of raise one argument, raise the other argument, then the comparison, then the conclusion. Try and think about interviewing in that way if you're giving an example. So you're kind of giving an overview, and then you're giving one side, giving the other side, the comparison, and then the conclusion on it. So you're kind of covering all grounds. And I think it's really important to give detail and context to your examples,
Mm.
because we'll always get feedback from someone who didn't get a second interview or didn't get the job because they didn't give enough information on something, and it's so minuscule sometimes, it's so annoying. But we always encourage, and I've talked about it a few times on LinkedIn, the best interview tip that I could give anyone is at the end of the interview, when you're given the opportunity to ask questions, is to ask, have you got any concerns around my skills or ability to do the job?
Nice. Yeah.
That is a question that employers aren't, or interviewers aren't, expecting.
Mhm.
You generally get like an off the cuff answer. You can get a really good understanding of maybe how that interview's gone,
Yeah.
unless someone's really, really good at like not giving anything away.
Mhm.
But also, say, for example, like anyone at the beginning of an interview isn't as comfortable as they are towards the end. So the answers you give at the beginning are probably a little bit more scripted, um, with a little less personality. And if any hiring managers have got any concerns around the questions answered at the beginning, you can kind of re-answer them.
Mm.
And off that feedback, I had one candidate in particular said, and he wasn't even going through an interview through myself, but he said to me, he said, "Oh, Anna, I used the interview tip, um, and they told me that they were worried about, the fact that I had loads of experience and would the job be enough for them, and I managed to reassure them in that moment, and then he was actually he'd gone on to get offered the job and was quite happy." So it really does, it gives you a bit more of an insight, because from a recruitment perspective, the most frustrating thing is when we know someone has the experience and the feedback as to why they didn't get second interview or offer is because they don't have enough experience, and you're like, you know
Yeah.
um, but I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that not everybody knows how to interview
Mm.
and get the best out of people. So
Especially if they've been in a job. They've been an underwriter for 20 years. Like they have
yeah,
been for an interview for 20 years. So yeah.
exactly.
Oh,
So
I love that tip. That's brilliant. Yeah, it just gives you that opportunity to like deal with it in the moment and
absolutely.
that
Squash any
could it.
concerns, get a good understanding of how the interview's actually gone. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's a really useful one. So I would encourage anyone to use that.
Love it. I remembered actually the question that I was going to follow on from before. It was like someone like me that's been out of the industry for now 7 years. If I was to want to come back in and I've had all this experience running my own business, albeit in like a slightly different industry, I'm coaching women in insurance, in leadership. Like what are my chances of actually getting a look in now because of the fact I've been out of the industry?
I love the fact that you've asked this question, because that is an area that we are really good at. So I've actually brought quite a lot of women mainly back into the insurance industry after having to take time out for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But it's it's more of an education piece, I would say, for employers, because it's like riding a bike. You don't just forget how to ride a bike after you've sort of been riding a bike for years and years and years. So actually it's just making sure that the business has, enough training and support there. But, for example, I got referred to somebody who was an underwriter for a long time. And she left underwriting to have her children and raise her kids, as a lot of women have to do sometimes, in any industry. But it seems to be quite prominent in the insurance industry that there's a lot of women who sort of had a really good sort of 10, 12-year career as an underwriter, for example, left to have their kids. And once their kids are at a certain age, they want to come back into it. I was able to have a good conversation with her, reassure her that actually this is something that she can do. And there were a few things that she said that were like, probably will resonate with so many other people, um, you know, for taking time out. She wanted time back for herself, and that career, and to continue on from where she left off, really. And she was really quite not very confident that that would happen, because of the industry she left 6 years ago was very different and not as flexible as what it is now. Um, and anyway, I worked with her and found her a fantastic company to work with that took her on, and she's doing so, so well. And that's just one of many stories that I can share with people.
Mm.
So I think if you are sat, and you've sort of had 7, 8 years out, I'm working with someone at the minute who had, I think it was like 15 years out, and she's due to be made an offer soon to go back into underwriting. So it can happen. You just have to find the right company and work with the right, people to help push that for you. So it's absolutely possible.
Ah, I love that. And it's really interesting because I just think you get so like taking that step away, you're going to get so much like different experience, life
Absolutely.
experience for one. And then if you are like running your own business or something, or have like trying your hand at something different,
Yeah.
you're going to learn so much. Like I am such a different person than I was when I left. And I know that I would do things so differently if I went back now. Not that I want to, but it's kind of like really fascinating to think about how that experience would be seen, or whether it would be like discounted and like I can't, you kind of hope that they would look at the holistic kind of
Yeah,
what that
yeah.
brings. But
Think, you're never going to walk back in on the same salary that you left at. I think that needs to be, that's a kind of a consideration, because there will be sort of a skills gap at that point. Products move on, systems change, but it's absolutely possible to get back into it. So, and I think just to add to that, I know obviously you talked about sort of your experience being 20 years in one employer. Actually, since you've kind of left that and had your own business and learned all these different skills, you can also say that's the same when you move companies. You learn to adapt to different ways of working and gain different skill sets. And that is also very welcomed. When you're joining a company, that's seen as a positive. So,
nice.
to add to
Oh, there's so much goodness in there. I feel like I just want to touch on, is there anything before we go into kind of like your view of leadership as a business owner?
that.
Is there anything you haven't touched on in terms of the recruitment landscape and what you want people to take away if they're listening? I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, I think I have covered a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, let's get into this then. So I'm just interested, like you started your business so young
Yeah,
and you're a mum of four young
yeah.
girls. I think you've done incredibly well and you've got this business with three or four people, three people. And yeah, I just love everything that you've created. So tell me what you've learned about like leading a business and a team and all the things in this last 8 years that, yeah, just tell me what you've learned about leadership that you want other people perhaps to know about.
I think I'm still learning is probably the the biggest thing for me. I brought on Kat 3 years ago. I've had Terry since last December, and actually I worked with Terry previously in a different business when I was sort of, early 20s. So I take that as a massive compliment that she would want to come and work for my business.
Absolutely.
I think leadership, I mean, I just I don't know. I mean, I haven't learned all of the tricks of the trades and I'm not an expert in leadership, but I'm trying to do run a business that provides a really good service and take on people who really believe in that as well. And I think that if you're kind of, on that mission, then other people see that it kind of helps to sort of give them a driving force as well. Um, I'm very human, realistic. Um, Running a business is really stressful. Like, alongside children, you're constantly pulled between, driving your career in that kind of career driven mindset. And then you're like, no, but I'm a mum and, I need to be there for the kids. And it's a constant battle. Um, but I think trying to bring everyone together and just trying to sort of motivate each other, there's a big thing in recruitment that, you know, it's when it's not going so well that, demonstrates your kind of capability and, I think supporting each other when it doesn't go so well is probably a really, really big thing as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm still learning. So any leadership advice and guidance, then great.
Well, I've got a good podcast you can listen to.
Nice.
I think what I see is just someone that's very passionate about like doing a really good job for
Yeah.
this industry and doing it like differently. And by differently, we just mean like keeping that human touch when technology is moving on so fast, when sometimes things feel like candidates could feel so alone and unheard and unseen. I think it's you just bring that real connection piece, and I think that's what I see. And I think these are the things in leadership that are just often not valued. And
Yeah.
it's like having empathy for the person on the end of the phone that has been through 130 applications and hasn't had any responses, and like knowing that you want to do better by those kind of people. I think that they're kind of the leadership things that I think I've heard throughout this conversation, which I just want to reflect back to you. So I think keep up the good work. Um,
And that's what we forget, right? As business,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, totally.
Oh yeah.
And just on that last note then, why would people want to own their own business? Or like, because that's another option, right? When people are thinking about leaving or thinking about going to do their own thing, it is an option to not just go and get another job, but to actually set up your own business. Like, what's the thing that you want people to know about that? You've talked about how hard it can be, but like, what are some of the rewards for actually taking this route?
I think it's, you know, if you're leaving something to go and set up your own business, it's all on your terms, right? So, you know, you don't, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not easy in any way, shape, or form, and you're going to have stresses and worries that you'd never had when you were employed. Um, but, you know, working till 10 o'clock at night, for example, you're doing it for yourself. So it hits very differently. And yes, you're exhausted, but it's all to kind of, you know, to benefit you and your family and whatever else that you want in life. um I'm a massive supporter of people who want to go and set up their own businesses, you know. So I and at any age, I think as well, I think there's some sort of like, um I suppose there's some sort of judgment around people doing it when they're younger, or at any age, you know, even if you're sort of later on in your career and you want to go and do something completely differently, just do it. Um, you know, what is the worst that can happen?
They'll be giving you a call.
Exactly. And again, you know, we've kind of covered the fact that actually, you know, you can go back into the industry. It's not, you know, I mean, my kind of fail proof was if all else fails in recruitment, I can just go back to hairdressing. Like,
There you go.
I mean, you
All
know,
is not lost.
exactly. So, you know, just try it, you
Yeah.
know, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not the end of the world.
Ah, I love
Quite
that.
simple, really.
Yeah, it is. It
It's simple, isn't it? So, you know, just do it.
I do think it does take a massive leap of faith, though, in yourself.
It does. It does. But then, you know, I do think, you know, what is the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
What is the worst that can happen?
absolutely. Well, on that note, Anna, thank you. I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate you saying yes to coming on the show. And for anyone that wants to reach out, we'll make sure that the links are in the show notes. Definitely go check you out on LinkedIn and the team and give you a follow or even give you a call or look you up when you're next in London. So thank you so much for
Thanks
coming on.
thanks for having me.
And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. And thanks for being here. Take care.